Jennifer, it is so great to finally have a chance to chat with you and meet with you and hear more about your practice. So I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you, Erica. It's great to finally meet you sort of in person.
Yeah, right? Oh, Zoom. Isn't it a crazy world we live in now? So you are out in Montana right now in your studio. And I just wanted to start off with a little bit of your story of, how you first came into the arts and how that led you to where you are now in Montana.
Okay. That's such a big question, right? Especially when you're talking to an art educator, because I mean, I really think it begins in childhood.
Mhm.
And that's like where I focus a lot of my energy. But I mean, as a kid, I was creative. But I'm realizing right now, like having grown up in Washington State, now teaching in Montana, and these are states that don't fund arts education through K-12, like a lot of the stronger programs in Illinois and Massachusetts, for example. So I just feel like I've kind of like lived this scrappy life with art. And I just remember in third grade, I had this teacher, classroom teacher, Mrs. Neely, and she saw my spark and she would find these little avenues for me to create. And I felt special and I felt seen in a way. And I wish I doubt she's alive now, but I would love to ask her, like, what did she see? Did she see that I was creative or did she see that I was struggling? Yeah. But I mean, I really think it starts there.
Mhm.
And then you fast forward to high school, I wound up going to this Catholic school in Portland, Oregon. And I mean, my senior year, they converted the art studio to a computer lab, and the art room was literally in the girls' locker room in the basement. Can you believe it? I mean, I think
Can't
they were
sadly, I can't.
renovating. I know, I know. They were renovating. So I don't know what it looks like now. My niece now attends Central Catholic, but yeah, I could ask her. I know they have a ceramics program now too, so I think they've expanded. But yeah, I mean, an unbelievable lack of foresight.
Mhm.
And then my brother wound up going to PNCA and graduated and had a show. He was an oil painter, and he got a bad review and he just stopped, completely
Oh,
stopped.
wow.
But before that, I would go and hang out with him and stay the night with him downtown. And, I just felt like, oh, this is totally the way that I want to live. I want to go to art school. But then I realized, oh, he's got like cockroaches in his apartment and he's waiting tables at this nice restaurant. And I want health insurance and I want a family. So anyway, and then I went to this alternative college called the Evergreen State College. And it's alternative in that it's interdisciplinary and there are no requirements. So students take programs and then they write self-evaluations. Faculty also write evaluations. It was, loosely based on UC Santa Cruz, but with a much higher acceptance rate of students. So different population to work with. Anyway, so I started to study art and then I thought, oh, this is not me. I'm leaving. I want to study literature. I want to be a teacher. And I was working with this incredible faculty member, Marilyn Frasca, and she just leaned forward in her Marilyn way and said, "You'll be back." And I was furious. I'm like, oh, how do you know me? Like, you know what you're talking about. But then I came back.
And she was right. You came back,
She
you're
was
like,
right.
oh,
She
Marilyn.
was right. Yeah. Part
Oh.
of that story too, though, is that I grew up with a learning disability that wasn't diagnosed.
Mhm.
And a lot of creative people have dyslexia. I mean, the rate is really high. I'm not dyslexic. I actually learned how to read and was reading in kindergarten, and they bumped me up to first grade. But I have a working memory learning disability that wasn't diagnosed until my 30s.
Hmm.
And so I think, that whole process of really struggling in school and, feeling stupid, that just definitely shaped who I am as a teacher, who I am as a creator, my interest in early childhood education. So that is also another thread in the story.
I find that that's so interesting. Like a few things that are going on here, which is number one, that you knew yourself so well that when you were going to see your brother, you were like, cockroaches, no, I want health insurance, a family, like I want to have this life, which I think is really great in terms of thinking forward about what you need and like actually having a life.
Mhm.
While at the same time watching him go through this and then have this bad review and then stop. I mean, that I think would really have an impact seeing like, your brother who you care about who's doing this thing and then getting this, you know, critique of sorts. So I have to just commend you for knowing yourself so well. That's incredible. I did not know myself so
Thank
well
you.
at that age. I was like, I don't know where I'm going. Um, and then also, you know, working through a diagnosis later in life of a learning disability that allows you to look back through a different lens and see like your education. A good friend of mine, she went through the arts, has a learning disability. And I noticed she said basically the same thing you said. I felt stupid. Like I was just, when I was going through, like those are her exact words, because she wasn't able to do things the same way. So I love that you are taking all of this and really pushing it forward to your students. I mean, that's an incredible gift for all of them and for the education system.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
mean, I've worked with a lot of therapists to get to this place, so I didn't do it alone. I mean, even
It takes the
I was
village.
a visiting faculty member here at UM for a year, and it was like I was on a year-long interview.
Mhm.
It was because I knew there would be a national search in the spring. And I was working closely with this incredible therapist here in Missoula, and she just kept on saying to me, it's so helpful to have people in education that really struggled in the system because you can reach a completely different population. And I knew that when I was still teaching K-12 in Washington, because especially teaching art, I mean, you get all the misfits and marginalized folks, and you create this amazing cocoon of support. Yeah, it
I
was
love
great.
that. I love
Yeah.
that so much because you're right. Kids get dismissed into the art class. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, oh, we're just going to kind of shove them over there in the girls' locker room. You know? So, can you tell me a bit then about this transition from teaching K-12 to where you are now, where you're teaching at University of Montana in Missoula, like how that transition happened, and pros and cons of it?
Okay, well, a lot of folks who are dying to have tenured positions are going to hate me, but I really, so embarrassed to say this because my mother, oh, but I followed a man to Montana. Like I had a great job in Olympia. I owned a house. And then, yeah, I was like, but I had gone to school in Olympia and I had lived there 20 years and I just was ready for a change. I had just gone through a horrible breakup. And I mean, it was a huge transition and it was one of the more challenging things that I've done. But I followed a man and my plan was just to substitute teach in K-12
Mhm.
and work as an artist. I thought, okay, this is my chance to really do it. And then he and I was, yeah, I won't go down that road, but he was teaching, he got a job out here
Mhm.
teaching at the university. And so I wasn't a spousal hire. I mean, I was for that first year just because there was a visiting position. And then, yeah, it was only part-time though. That's right. Because Bobby Tilton, who was teaching art ed, was still teaching one class. And then it was this amazing setup too. So she mentored me so I could actually watch how she would teach and then, follow that. I literally just mimicked her entire program. And then there was a national search at the end of the year, and I got it, which was pretty amazing. I mean, I think that their first choice was this amazing kick-ass artist with a PhD and an MFA, but she got scooped up by another university. Anyway, so I got lucky. So, I mean, it was, again, this just kind of like scrappy, like alignment of all the planets. Yeah.
I love it.
Anyway.
I love it. And thank you for sharing that because the thing is that life takes us a lot of different places. Like we can have a plan and put it in place and then all these things are thrown at us and you have a breakup, you have a new relationship, you're in love, you relocate, you have these different things that come at us. And kind of riding that wave, I think is really incredible. And I'm so happy that you're there. I mean, Missoula is amazing. University of Montana has incredible students, and so they're so lucky to have you. And I love how you got the universe plunked you in there.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I feel so blessed. The 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 financial picture working in Montana is pretty bleak. I mean, I think we're like 49th for the amount of money that we spend per student in the state on education. And we were told when we were looking for a house, you can't eat the mountains. The pay is pretty bad here.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man. Well, now let's switch up to so you're in Montana, you're here, you're teaching. I want to dive into your studio practice and what you're creating and what you're making. I'm familiar with your paintings and also some photography that you had done, and with the Hidden Mother project, which was beautiful. I love looking at that. So can you just take us into what you're doing now? Like, what does a studio day look like for you at this point in your life?
Well, Erica, there are no studio days in my life. There are studio moments.
I love it.
Oh
Studio.
man. I mean, part of it is definitely that I am a mother, right? And I understand how short childhood is, and I really have made that a priority. And also moving here, it was such a huge transition from teaching K-12 to teaching in higher ed. And I like a lot of folks in my field have PhDs in art education, and I have two master's degrees, a master's in teaching and an MFA. And so I had a lot of catching up to do in the history of art ed, and also, how to really teach writing objectives, writing outcomes, and then how to meet those, and then how to translate that into helping them to write objectives and meet those. So I feel like and then I started having babies like 2 years in, two babies. And yeah, I just feel like, I mean, I squeeze like got a little bit of work in here and there, but I just feel like now I'm finally getting my stride again. Our kids, we live 20 minutes outside or half an hour outside of Missoula, and we transferred our kids to the country school out here, and it has been revolutionary because suddenly I have Mondays at home for studio days. I call them Magic Mondays. And oh man, I'm alone. Everybody's gone. So usually, to be honest, I clean for a couple hours and then I work in my studio. I try to get a 4-hour block. I like 4-hour blocks. Those work for me best. And then I volunteer in my kids' school because they don't have an art program.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. You are doing all the things, Jennifer. Like, I am
Oh,
so in awe, honestly, because I get it. I get it.
yeah.
Kids similar in age, and recognizing that it is fleeting, right? And you said, how short childhood is. I was literally just reflecting on that this morning as I was getting all my kiddos off into the world and thinking, like, this is going to be over in the blink of an eye. And it made me teary, actually,
Mhm.
because, we always have to sacrifice something to have something else, right? Like, there's
Mhm.
only so many hours in the day. And I feel like there's a lot of pressure on women artists now that we're talking about it publicly about having children,
Woo. Yeah,
thank God, right? But
right.
there's still this, well, you can have children, but you need to be in the studio every day, and like every waking hour is doing something. And I think it's really toxic. Like, there's this thing bubbling to the surface that I'm seeing, which is like, be a mom, be a mother, and be an artist, but you have to be showing that you are just rocking out in order to still be taken seriously. And I think that's like a really tragic thing, because like you said, there's only so many years where there's that young child. Did you feel any of this pressure, or do you see any of these things happening in the art world for mothers?
Oh, definitely. And I think the crux is taken seriously. Like, what does that really mean? And
Yeah.
what does it mean for me? Because, I'm 51 years old. I'm not going to quote unquote make it in the art world. And I don't really care because that's not what feeds my heart and soul. What feeds my heart and soul is literally just being in my studio for some time every week alone, like where I'm in charge. I mean, that's what I love about painting.
Mhm.
Even like the paint is really in charge, right? But having that like meditative experience in the studio. And I mean, honestly, when I'm in a classroom with kids too, I get just as much joy. Like
Mhm.
I hit that sweet spot where, I'm just witnessing this unfolding of studio practice and my heart just swells. So to me, that's success, you know?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I understand. I really, when I was in my 20s and 30s and I was on the West Coast and I was like trying to get into the scene and not getting into the scene and feeling like, oh, I'm so uncool. I'm such a failure. And it feels so liberating to just let go of that. I mean,
Yeah.
what is that? Like, you know, you always ask at the end of the podcast, is there anyone you want to give a shout out to? And I was thinking, who I want to give a shout out to is your kid's art teacher, because they're like quietly in the evenings working, doing their thing, hopefully, if they can find the energy and time for it. But yeah, what's liberating about getting older is just kind of shifting what it means to make it and what it means to be successful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Like defining like really what is success, you know?
Mhm.
And I think we all have to maybe reflect on that question for ourselves and see what we think of that. Like what is success? Is it, quote unquote, getting that gallery, getting that space, or is it having health insurance, having healthy children that you can be around, or, being able to watch them grow,
Yeah.
however that may play out. So I think that's really wonderful. So you were talking about the meditative experience of painting, which really speaks to me and how I kind of work. So I was hoping you could just take us through how you start a painting or how you work through a painting.
Um, well, I start with this like intuitive response to a color relationship. For me, it's all about color.
Mhm.
And then what I've been doing lately is just kind of making a mess first on the panel or canvas and then cleaning it up. So it's really just this continuous kind of opening and tidying and opening and tidying. And I revised my artist statement a couple of years ago, but as I'm becoming more comfortable with myself,
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm thinking that what's really going on with my abstraction is this holding on to all of the different parts in order to create a whole. And I think that ties into this disability with working memory,
Mm.
where I have to, until I have a story, until all the disparate parts sew together and make a bigger whole, I can't hold on to the tiny details. And then once that story is fused together and is held, then I can remember it and retell it and recall it. And I've got it forever. But
Mhm.
I think with all these, especially right now, I'm working really controlled with tape and I'm masking and pulling off these almost color field sections. And it has to do with all of these smaller parts working together to create a larger story, a larger whole.
I love that. And I find it interesting about how you were talking about working memory. And could you share a little bit more about that and about how that functions? Because I'm kind of trying to almost visualize how it's working with these different parts and coming together and what that kind of looks like for you
In painting or in life?
in life, in working memory disability, because I haven't heard of that before. So I'd love to learn more about it.
Okay, so if there are, it's similar to ADD. So my therapist, numerous therapists have thought, oh, I think you have ADD. And so, this was going on when I was teaching high school in Washington, and my colleagues were like, oh, duh, of course you do. Like, oh, but then, I went through evaluation and, no, and then I went through another evaluation, and then I went through this like 8-hour evaluation, and it's basically when your working memory is scores on the test are lower than your IQ.
Mhm, mhm.
There's this gap. And so if I'm trying to hold on, for example, to dates, but there's no larger story that helps me to remember those dates, that's a working memory issue. Or if I'm reading a text and there are numerous characters, so a strategy I use is I have an index card and I write down all the characters' names and then put it in the book. But then once those characters are developed as a bookmark, and then once those characters are developed, then I've got that information in my working memory and I can cruise through the
Mhm.
novel or
Oh,
whatever.
interesting. That is fascinating to me.
Mhm.
Um, I feel like I know a lot of creative people who are being diagnosed with ADHD at an older age. You know what I mean? They're adults, they're parents, and things like that they were able to kind of mask over when they didn't have a family have now come
Yeah,
to light because
totally.
big parts, right? So I'm gonna have to share that with some of my friends who they feel like they're not totally in ADHD, but this is something else. So yeah, very
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that. Mhm.
Yeah, and there are lots of books specific to women with ADHD and ADD because of the patriarchy and the structure we have. Parenting falls to the woman unless there's a structure in place. Often there is not a structure in place in the domestic realm. So, she gives these examples of, strategies. Oh, hire help. I'm like, well, a lot of people can't hire help. Like, yeah, it would be great to have a cleaner come once a week.
Yeah, right. You're like, that's wonderful. If you can give me all the money to do that, and then yeah, we'll make it happen. We'll fix all of these things that are going on. But yeah,
Right.
okay, that's very cool. So yeah, then relating it to your work, as I was looking at it, I love that there seems to be these different parts that are held together with composition or the way they're kind of relating to each other, the different forms. I find that fascinating. And you were talking a lot about color. So my question to you, there's two of them, would be, are you inspired by anything around you for your palette? And secondly, do you work on multiple pieces at one time?
I think that for color, I really am inspired through other people's work. And so if I see a painting, if I see a color relationship, that's, even in visual culture, like an advertisement or even in like clothes folks wear, I'll say, oh, I really like the way these two colors are working together. And it's tied to emotion for me. And then I just bring that into the studio. And I usually work in series of 4. And then I'll work with a series of 4 and then set them down and then I'll work with another series of 4. And I mean, I didn't used to do that. I used to try to work on one painting at a time and, stick with it until it was finished and then move on to the other. And I think that was just this track of like how I thought artists should work. Just like I thought, oh, okay, to be an artist means you have to be obsessed and only think about art and, always just be dying to get into the studio. And then I realized, I saw this lecture by James Labrador. He's an oil painter from Eastern Washington or Oregon. And he has this like setup in the studio and he said he works on like 100 paintings at a time and he makes these abstractions of landscape. Yeah, of the landscape and they're gorgeous, but that was so liberating to me. Yeah, artist lectures, I feel like especially for art teachers, they are a lifeline because
Mhm.
they're so inspiring, that's like seeing work. But for me, like actually hearing the artists talk about their process, it makes them human rather than these kind of abstractions in a text.
I completely agree. I completely agree. And I feel like, when we were kind of coming of age, because we didn't have access to podcasts, I mean, they didn't exist, or
Yeah.
artist lectures that we could, we had to travel physically to be at them. It kept artists kind of cloistered off almost,
Hmm.
where they became put on almost on pedestals. Like, oh my gosh, look at this artist. That's all they think about. That's all they do. This is who an artist is. This is, the idea. And now that we can hear about, like you're talking about this man, James, this person, James, who is like working on all these and how it's liberating. And now we can talk about how you shifted from what you were doing previously with working with a certain age group to something else, and someone's going to be listening and be like, oh my gosh, that's so liberating because I want to
Mhm.
do that. So,
Yeah.
yes, I love it.
I mean, Erica, in 21, 22, I was on sabbatical. And it was like right when, I mean, my youngest kid was, I think he was 3 or 4, but I started to, sense this wave of me, like, who am I? What do I want to do? Because I was alone for the first time in 10 years, 7 years. And I obsessively listened to your podcast. I mean, I started year one, season one, and I don't know how I heard about it, but I think you were on season 3. And I mean, I have notes of all these like folks whose what they shared with you resonated with me. And it was like, oh, not only are these artists that are not afraid of being transparent, they're totally honest, they're human, they want to have families. Yeah. I mean, it was a godsend. So I can't thank you enough. Yeah.
That makes this like, this is what I want. This is exactly what I want, is I want to be able to help people, because I get it too. Like when I had my first child, I felt really isolated and scared because I really didn't know of other women who were also artists that were kind of on that path. And they were out there, it just wasn't being discussed. So I was like, okay, let's have conversations, let's be honest, let's be transparent, let's talk about having a life while being
Mhm.
an artist, because there's lots of different ways to do it. And so, oh, I just love that. Oh my gosh, and season 1 was so hilarious. Looking back on it, my very first interview, it was a lot of fun. Um, so, kind of in the same vein of that, I always love to hear of advice that you've received that stands out to you that you would like to pass along to other people that are listening. So is there anything you'd like to share, like advice you've received that you felt like really helped you on your journey?
I I went I think it was maybe in 2014 I read Anne Marie Slaughter's book, The Unfinished Business of Feminism. And she writes of quitting her job in DC, working with Clinton and Hillary Clinton, and going back home to work with her, to be with her kids who were in high school. And I think it was her youngest son was really struggling. And she writes of the shock that her colleagues had when she made that decision. And there's a passage in that book where she talks about women like putting ladders down rather than pulling them up.
Mhm.
And I cannot believe the amount of ladders that I have seen being set down to raise other women. I
Mhm.
mean, it's unbelievable. Laura Francis Evans, who started the group, the Artist Parent Academic, she
Mhm.
works at Samford University. And as part of her service work, she, started essentially almost like a dating service for parents that are academics
Mhm.
and mothers. And she creates these support groups. And I'm in this group with 5 other women right now, and we have this text thread, and it started in the pandemic. And it's just been, this support network where we can completely be honest and raw and talk about what's challenging in our classrooms. There's this massive decrease in enrollment in universities across the country. It has to do with birth order. And so a lot of kind of middle tier, lower tier universities, state schools especially, are closing or they're merging, and there isn't enough money to fund the programs. And so we're constantly strategizing and talking to each other about how to continue to deliver high quality curriculum in a situation that is challenging, how to be new parents and keep our jobs. And then also we've been, organizing exhibitions for each other, which helps with tenure and retainment. So that's an example of like putting that ladder down and supporting women. And then I'm in this other group with art educators from across the country. And it started as a text thread during the pandemic. And we were all new mothers when we started, working together and supporting one another. And it's, now been going on for 7 or 8 years. Isn't that beautiful? I
I
mean,
love it.
yeah,
I love it. It's creating our own communities to truly support one another in a way
yeah,
that's not ego driven.
yeah.
It is about truly being in a life and connecting fully with others. And
Mhm.
what's amazing is that, there's a lot of downsides with like technology and social media, but there's so many upsides when it's used this way. So I
Yeah,
think that is beautiful that you have
yeah.
these communities, like how cool is that?
Oh, it's phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. So as we're kind of getting to the end of this, I know you mentioned a shout out for artists is to all the art educators who are quietly working at night and also showing up for our kids. You know,
Mhm.
my son has ADHD and he's a kindergartner, and he struggles with writing, which is funny. He can sculpt like a crazy kid, but he can't really hold a pencil really well. And his favorite class is art class.
Of course it is.
Shocked. I was shocked at first. I was like, oh man, because people know I'm an artist there. And so they're always like, oh, your kids are going to be great. I'm like, I have no idea. Like we do things, but who knows once they're in this classroom setting. And it was because the art educator who's in there is able to work with him in ways that builds confidence and creativity, and so I'm when you said that, my heart really lit up thinking about the work that they do with our kids and then going home and potentially building their own practice of everything that they're doing. So is there anyone else you'd like to give a shout out to right now?
Oh, Erica, I just feel like I can't because
I know.
I mean, yeah, I can't list one person's name and not list another person's name. It just doesn't feel right.
I totally understand. I know I always wonder about this question because I love the idea. I heard this from Sharon Loudon. She
Mhm.
said, whenever you're given an opportunity, see how you can include other people in it. And I love that
Right.
idea. So I was like, oh, I'm going to build this in here. But then I feel like it puts too much pressure on the person because we have such large communities of people.
Right.
So I think the shout out that you gave is just really perfect. Um, oh, yeah.
I will mention a couple folks' names. I had the complete joy of getting to listen to Tanya Willard give an artist talk. She's at UBC Okanagan at a conference in Vancouver, BC, a couple of years ago, and she's doing amazing work with Indigenous communities and kind of like bringing awareness to non-Native people and building support for Native people through her socially engaged practice. So she's doing amazing work. And another upcoming and rising artist that is a graduate from the University of Montana is Stella Nall. So she's also doing really great work, raising Indigenous voices and also talking about identity when you're from a multicultural, multi-ethnic background.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And we'll make sure to try and find their information and share it over on our show notes so more people can get eyes on their work and connect with them. And speaking of which, where can we find you online? Your website, Instagram?
My name, jennifercombe.com on Instagram, and I have a website as well.
Excellent. Jennifer, this has been such a joy to talk to you this morning and just connect more and learn more about your practice and life. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Erica, and thank you for the work that you're doing all across the world and country. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. All right. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.